So actually, the local authority and central government do not have to worry. They just have to promise us that we will get that ring-fenced bunch of rates, sorry, I'm waving this thing around, and that will contribute to our repayment. And if it doesn't, well, we've taken the risk. Obviously, they're going to do their sums quite carefully before they start and think they've got a fair chance of succeeding. So that is broadly what this is about. Hence, you can see the other names: local. What did I say it was called? Local Tax Reinvestment Programme, LTRIP. Exactly that. You ring fence some rates that you haven't got yet, but that you're going to get in the future to pay back borrowing that you do now in order for you to get on with the development. I mean, it sounds absolutely brilliantly simple. We'll come on to the pros and cons in a moment. Not surprisingly, of course, it came from America, as so much does. It was actually introduced in California in the 1950s. The rules are set by individual state in America, so you find it very different across the whole of the continent. Some states have only done it fairly recently. Others have been at it for a long time. Illinois has now over 900 TIFs. And they're of a hugely variable size. There's one little town with a population, I'm told, of 129 people that has actually got a TIF. God knows what that's actually for and how it's repaid, but there's all shapes and sizes in America. And it's done in both ways. It's done by local authority, their local state borrowing or bonds, or developer finance, what we call pay-as-you-go, the technical term for that. And in the States, originally, it was aimed specifically at areas suffering blight, suffering regenerative blight. Now it is much more loosely defined. And I think some say that actually the concept has been rather sort of spread, dissipated, and perhaps weakened because of that. That in America, it originally was seen specifically as a way of getting development going where you otherwise wouldn't actually have it. So let's have a look at the sort of advantages and disadvantages of this apparently absolutely brilliantly simple idea, because if it's so good, why isn't everybody rushing out and actually doing it? Well, the advantages. Obviously, it does enable the development to go ahead. And from my members' perspective, they think that's absolutely fantastic. That also has some benefits that one hopes, if the development has been planned properly and given permitted properly, brings huge benefits to a local area and to a community. It should raise new money, and I think Tom alluded to this. We don't want to just recycle funds that are already there. It's very easy in government. We see it all the time, especially with government announcements, simply recycling money that's already around. This is new money that wouldn't otherwise have gone into infrastructure, so if it's constructed properly. But you raise this new money without calling on public funds, per se, other than if you use the Public Works Loan Board, and you do it without raising higher taxes, because actually the business rates that you generate would actually, are new money in themselves. And some of you will immediately say, yes, but what about if they're just pulled in from the town over there by getting some businesses to move? I agree, an issue, and that'll come up in the disadvantages. You stimulate economic activity as a whole by doing this. You can increase values in an area. It overcomes the blight. And I think very important at the moment, it fits very well with this localism debate, which I've no doubt you and I certainly am getting very caught up in, particularly with the Tories and the papers they've been producing saying how they want to return power to local communities and local authorities. So actually this ought to touch some chords with the Tories. I'll explain in a moment whether and how it is. There are disadvantages, and I've alluded to one or two of them already. And by the way, we've been having discussions with the Treasury, and I don't know how many of you deal on a regular basis with the Central Treasury, which is just full of incredibly clever people who can always see 50 million theoretical reasons why you shouldn't do something. We deal with one terribly nice lady in the Treasury, very, very clever, and she sits there sort of wringing her hands and saying, yes, but what happens if, and she'll take you through sort of 15 reasons why it might all go horribly wrong. And we get increasingly frustrated and say, well, yes, all those things could happen, but for God's sake, let's at least try it and see whether they do. Do some pilots, test it, rather than talking theory. So of course, one of the Treasury's concerns is that you will simply transfer economic activity from one place to another. So one place's success will be another place's loss. How do you prove that you're actually creating new money? Which is actually quite a difficult one to prove. But, as I say, if you tried to prove absolutely every bit of every case, you'd never actually do anything. Sometimes you do have to take risks. Of course, there is the disadvantage that the business rates that are generated would be insufficient for repayment. You might draw a TIF boundary that would actually end up being very divisive in a local authority. And of course, it does restrict and enhance business rate income to a very specific project, whereas there might be specific infrastructure projects around a development, whereas they might be better used in a wider need. I think even the Americans would also acknowledge that their TIFs have worked better when you're in a buoyant economy. As we're not quite in a buoyant economy yet, you could argue now would not be the right time to be doing it. Given the time it takes the Treasury to do anything novel, if they started today, we might just be ready when our economy is becoming more buoyant. Because we all know that even in a buoyant economy, you always have areas of deprivation. The early this century, the economy was absolutely booming. You, I'm sure, all know of places that were not booming, that actually needed help and needed a leg up. There are a lot of candidates in the UK, a lot of places that we've looked at and that worked with our members and with other groups, in particular the Core Cities group, and there may be some representatives of the core cities here today who've done a huge amount of work on this, and I think in a way were the ones that probably got the attention of the Treasury certainly before we did. The most famous one at the moment, and which a lot of you will know and a lot of you will have been past this place, is Battersea Power Station. The people who want to develop Battersea Power Station, if I tell you they're Irish developers, you may suck your teeth slightly and wonder about how it's going to go, but that's all right because the Irish government have stepped in to help their banks and the people that the banks are funding. Anyway, leaving all that aside, Treasury Holdings have a great plan for Battersea Power Station. If you haven't seen it, you should look at it on the website. It's really good. They believe that opening up that whole area of South London, south of the river, is dependent on a Northern Line extension. Some of you probably travelled on the Northern Line today. You can see that the tube system generally needs additions to it to increase capacity. But to open up the Battersea area, you need a Northern Line extension. They believe that this would be a classic case for a TIF type arrangement. Mayor Boris thinks it would. So we've actually got some supporters on this. The local authority in Wandsworth actually agree. So that's quite an interesting one. A lot being done about that, a lot on in the media and on websites about that. Grosvenor, very, very respectable property company, the property company of the Duke of Westminster, effectively. They are trying to develop, this is Crawley, in fact. They need public realm, they need highways, they need car parking. They believe that Crawley would be a very good example. They've run some numbers. They think a TIF type arrangement could work. Really interesting is not just particularly the Fourth Ports one in Leith, in Edinburgh, but the fact that there are some Scottish candidates. And the Scottish government are showing a great deal of interest in TIFs, rather more than our own UK Treasury has done. And Alex Salmon, and I had the good fortune not to meet him a couple of weeks ago, and we chatted briefly about TIFs. And he said, I think this is the future. We're going to do it. And I said, can I take that as a public policy announcement? And he did actually, to his credit, when he stood up and spoke at our conference in Edinburgh, he did say, we're going to do it. I don't know whether he has the legislative power to do it. He thinks he does. So could see quite an interesting little clash coming up between the Scottish government and the Whitehall Treasury. And there'd be actually a superb irony of Alex Salmon leading the charge against his old pals, the Scottish mafia in the UK government, and particularly in the Treasury. But again, wrong bit. I'll come on to that to talk about government in a moment.